I know what you're probably thinking, and yes, by the strictest technical definition, expecting a valid offspring to come from the consummate union of magic and logic is a bit like trying to get oil and water to spontaneously generate algae. But, believe it or not, there is a method to my madness. Nearly every modern metaverse employs some example of the idea of extra-material planes, brains, bubbles, or spheres tethered to our material reality through some form of ethereal stitching. And it's this cosmopolitan Magispheric theory that I'll be building my thesis upon. What prompted me to compose this little thought blurb was a conversation I had with somebody over on the channel Discord. Links in the description for anyone interested. They were showcasing some new weapon designs for a new fantasy world they were developing, and over the course of our conversation, it occurred to me that for as often as magic and science are crossed over in our modern fictional zeitgeist, and for as often as magic gets used as a hand-wavy cure-all for bad or lazy weapon design.
Not that we think either term applies to this specific person's artwork, just wanted to make that clear.
And for as often as those geometrically challenged directions have been debunked, disputed, and retooled here on YouTube over the years, it surprises me that I've never encountered a properly defined UMFT, Unified Magical Field Theory. Granted, that might just be because I live under a rock when it comes to these things. Nevertheless, as I was writing this, a commenter on a recent upload asked if I would do a video on 40k power swords, and this seemed like as good a justification as any to jump down that rabbit hole. Now, let's quickly address the Warhound Titan in the room. Most of what I'm going to say here principally applies to blades, since they're the premier go-to for fantasy hero/villain weapons, which tend to get top bidding slots for magicification in most settings. However, if we're going off the idea that magic abides by its own internal code of logic and physics, and that said, codes abide by the laws of logic, i.e. continuity, conciseness, consistency, and causality, then what's true of the sword should also be applicable to the shield, the mace, the hammer, the axe, the gun, etc., given that mass is mass, velocity is velocity, etc., and that only the relative proportions of these things decide the ultimate form/fate of any system. In smaller words, the principle of a wedge or a lever remain constant, whether the former is acute or obtuse, whether the latter is long or short. However, a longer lever will always generate more power than a shorter one, and a narrower wedge will always cut deeper than a broader one under similar energy constraints. Now, having said all that, the definition of magic is power, which in practical terms is synonymous with capacity or ability that defies the ordinary rules of reality. But remember, the difference between a rule and a law is that the latter is context agnostic. The former requires external enforcement. For example, things like theft or murder are only going to have repercussions for you if you're poor, but a rich man's skull is no more bulletproof than a poor man's, since you can't cheat or bribe your way out of physics. And since physics is just the study of energy distribution, the plurality of magic systems are just the esoteric sciences of energy manipulation. It then follows that the four cardinal means of energy transference should naturally carry from the former to the latter, and thus we find the four principal stems of magical weaponry: energy absorption, energy emission, energy conduction, and energy reflection. In a word, in, out, coming through, and know you, respectively. As you can likely imagine, the first and fourth primarily apply to shields, although, just as in real life, swords are known for their ability to channel all four of these intrinsic patterns more or less equally, which would explain their ubiquity in the magical worlds just as it does in our home reality. In antiquity, swords were what pistols are in the modern day, emergency backups or weapons of last resort. Mostly they were what you carried when you didn't expect to need a weapon, but were a good combination of convenience and effectiveness should such a need ever present itself. Of course, their utility depended much more on the skill of the user than did other weapons like the spear or crossbow, which, while certainly would be more deadly in skilled than in non-skilled hands, required only a few weeks of training at most to achieve true proficiency with, thus the formers being crowned the king of the battlefield by soldiers and scholars, both ancient and modern alike. The shield obviously specializes in the absorb and return aspects of energy manipulation, and the mace, hammer, or axe are obviously preferred for the projection side of the panopticon sphere. Blunt weapons like staffs and wands, and also ranged options like bows and slings seem to be preferable for conduits. I can't really think of a practical, in-lore reason why that should be, apart from maybe that a stick would be less conspicuous and would have to be supplemented in the lethality department by an etheric energy capacitor of some kind, which would also explain why wizards and monks are usually depicted as frail old men and skinny nerds. Yes, I know there's other reasons, but within this specific context it still works is what I'm saying. But here's where we come to the first real glitch in the Matrix. If you thought my Why Wizards Should Have Wings video being released when it was a coincidence, you would be factually correct, since this video wasn't actually supposed to come out this week. The one that is just taking way longer than it was supposed to, due to it being heavy in the infographic department. This was just the closest available option I had to fill its spot, hence the discrepancies between the visuals and the audio a minute ago. But be that as it may, in keeping with the universality of metaphysical arcana, the same principles that provide things like dragons and immortals immense magical superiority over humans should apply to magical weapons as well. You see, as this person correctly pointed out, arcane affinity being an after effect for humanity rather than a ubiquitous staple explains why the learning curve for us is exponentially greater than for those species of more intrinsically magical persuasion: elves, dragons, fairies, vampires, etc. This also explains why all these eldritch species would naturally be more physically resilient than us. It's the same reason as why dark side masters like Palpatine tend to look like walking corpses. Their bodies physically cannot handle the bulk of the etheric charge being passed through them, and so, like an overtaxed electrical wire, they simply melt. A dragon has both the size and the intrinsic conductivity to not only negate this effect, but in some iconic cases, such as the Draconis Rex, or true dragons found in the likes of Tolkien's Legendarium or the D&D monster manuals, they can actually use it to obfuscate or utterly eliminate senescence. I.e., they perpetually become bigger, stronger, smarter, and more powerful as they age, never succumbing to atrophy or entropy. This same logic holds for immortals, from the copious varietals of undead and bio/magitech mutants to the gods, celestials, primordials, and the multifarious crafts, minions, sidekicks, avatars, and misbegotten spawns thereof. Their ability to ignore the ravages of time already implies superhuman endurance, notwithstanding the abnormal speed, strength, vitality, etc. the higher forms tend to possess. And, of course, the same thing applies to wizards, warlocks, sorcerers, alchemists, Jedi, Sith, etc. for all the same reasons. Thence unlocks the first of three major subclasses of arcane weapons: the conduit. If you're not clear on what the difference between a channel and a conduit is, the simplest way I can explain it is this. A channel is like a river, while a conduit is like a gun barrel. The former is just an open line connecting a higher concentration font of magical energy, the warp, the force, the weave, heaven, hell, etc., to a low concentration basin, i.e. the material verse, where the latter's a breach in a closed power cell/chamber, most typically being the wielder's own life force or whatnot. However, the exception to this rule is the second subclass, the vessel, essentially a font and a conduit rolled into one. And along that same line, the third subclass is the ultimate culmination of all three of the above, what I'm going to call the phylactery. You'd more likely call a possessed or sentient weapon. The reason I don't refer to it as such is that sentience means self-awareness, and haunted implies an infusion of an external sentience has taken place. And as anyone who's ever had or worked with a car, computer, animal, AI chatbot,
or even the most common sorts of humans
before will be well aware, a thing does not need to be consciously aware of itself or its place in the universe to be a problem for everyone else in it. Having said that, though, much like how demons and fairies in pre-Christian myth and folklore were no more intrinsically good or evil than humans, an autonomous instrument is, at the end of the day, still an instrument of its user, like a soldier or attack dog. Depending on its nature, training, and the skill/quality of its handler, it can either be an epic force multiplier or a tungsten anchor. Also, it just occurs to me, post-script, that there's one final branch on our little Arma Magica family tree I neglected to mention. I'm not wholly sure where exactly you'd categorize them, probably closer to arcane projectors, aka magic guns, than CQC armaments like swords. But phantom weapons, e.g. lightsabers, energy swords, wraith blades, etc., are worth covering as their own distinct entity class due to their unique versatility and the ability to so fully retract into their parent vessel as to be functionally non-existent when not in use.
And it's also worth noting that while these groups can and do stand alone, they're not mutually exclusive. Moreover, their depiction as standalone features seems to be the exception rather than the rule, at least for the legendary rankers.
Now, I could sit here for 3 more weeks going over the pros and cons of each separate variant hitherto mentioned. But apart from that, every other lore/armor/fantasy nerd on Earth has already beaten me to that punch years ago. The main point I wanted to articulate through this venture is that of MSFT. MST, Magispheric String Field Theory. Essentially, a unified theory of magic I developed for the Omniverse, meant to describe the interchange of thought and energy, any and every setting with a hard magic system, i.e., a system wherein magic is a manipulable force.
As opposed to a static background condensate or force field matrix like a higher order reality's physics.
Mind you, it's still very much a work in progress, but the most relevant bit of it is that, much like how I suggested that integrity with these magical fields would be the cause for most intrinsically magical creatures like dragons evolving wings, tails, tentacles, etc., the geometry of a magical weapon would naturally be reflective of its manipulative properties. To slightly adapt a line from C.S. Lewis, random meaningless strings of words don't suddenly acquire meaning just because we affix to them the three words because it's magic. TLDR form always reflects function, even when we're talking about magic. A hammer's the objectively correct choice for a magical vessel or phylactery for the same reason that it's the best choice for cracking cement. A larger body can store more energy, and a greater load can be concentrated by use of a point or a wedge, such as in a warhammer or battle axe. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is that the key to intelligent magical weapon design is the same as all elements of fantasy. It's a delicate combination of human psychology and mechanical engineering. Overexpression in either arena tends to be representative of a pathological flaw in the designer, and trying to do too many things at once results in it doing nothing of value at all.
For anyone who's going to take offense at these remarks, just know that Wolf speaks from personal experience on both counts.
This same thought process applies to all other areas of magic: sigils, spells, runes, artifacts, etc. A spirit is a disembodied mind, a mind is a living tool, and a tool exists to serve a purpose. Find a thing's purpose, and you'll find its form. And vice versa. Simple as. Now, before I prattle on too much for anyone's good, I'm going to leave this thing off with this cheeky little movie clip that YouTube decided to recommend me shortly after my Wizard Wings video debuted.
Wolf forgot to say it, so I'll do it for him. Peace be upon you, and have a nice day.
I will not concede defeat by this modern world. I will not retire to this fool's paradise.
But we have no choice. Inevitability is the strongest magic of all.
I have weapons you would not dare use. I'll teach man to use his machines. I'll show him what distorted science can give birth to. I'll teach him to fly like a fairy. And I'll give the ultimate answer to all his science can ask. And the world will be free for my magic again. While your powers die, mine will flourish. Man will never inherit my domain, for I am making man mine. He will understand and come to desire my magic. It is inevitable. You shall see. So be it, now and forever. Farewell! Can you not feel the world turning in my direction already?